We are called in Scripture to contend for our faith. And I think that today that means something quite different than it would have a generation ago. The reason is that today we live, for the most part, in secular culture, in which Christian assumptions are no longer taken for granted. A generation ago, Christian assumptions, or Judeo-Christian assumptions, if you will, formed the shared consensus of the society. Even people who were not Christian, who were Jewish, or maybe even non-believers, if you said to them, well, what about those 10 commandments? They would say, well, that's probably a pretty good way to organize your life. It's a pretty good code to live by. Today, however, we all have one foot, in some cases both feet, in secular culture. In the last few years, we have seen the emergence of something quite new, which is a kind of new atheism that is more belligerent, but also more effective than the atheism of the past. Now, we've had atheism in America for a long time, but a generation ago, if you said atheist, you would think of somebody like the activist Madalyn Murray O'Hair. Some of you remember her. Or you might think of some kind of a rumpled ACLU lawyer. This was not an atheism with mass appeal. The new atheists, however, are a little bit more of a suave and sophisticated bunch. We know most of their names by now. Richard Dawkins, the Oxford biologist, author of The God Delusion. My sparring partner, Christopher Hitchens, author of God is Not Great. Sam Harris, the author of The End of Faith. The philosopher Daniel Dennett. The Princeton bioethicist Peter Singer, and so on. This is the new breed of atheist. And they are intellectually somewhat more elegant, more impressive. But more than this, their agenda is different. A generation ago, what did the atheists want to do? Well, they pretty much were policing the boundaries of church and state. The goal of the atheists was to, take the 10 commandments down from the Texas state capitol, something like that. The new atheists, on the other hand, want to do far more. Their idea is to pursue Christianity into the private sphere and attack it there. Their goal really is to make every Christian feel like a complete idiot for believing in Christianity. And the new atheists have targeted, I think very self-consciously, young people. They say, we know we're not the majority in society, but that's okay, because we have influential positions in the media, in education, in the universities. So we're going to let the Christian parents program religion into young people. At some point, they're going to have to unleash these young people into the world. That's when we get a hold of them. And we will use the techniques of education and science and skepticism and questioning to deprogram religion out of the next generation. And I think this has been, to some degree, successful. I think atheism today has become a bit more viable of an option in our society than it ever was before. And it comes at a time when I think, as Christians, many of us are a little bit unprepared for all this. I want to give you a little bit of a feeling for what this sort of new atheism sounds like. I was recently reading one of the articles of one of the new atheists. He was talking about current events, about 9/11, about the war on terror. And he said that if you look at this war, it's kind of a war of competing fundamentalisms. Over there, Islamic fundamentalism. Over here, Christian fundamentalism. And what do these two groups have in common? Well, they are fueling their fanaticism at the same holy gas station. In other words, religion is the problem. He said if you look at 9/11, it is more accurately described as, quote, a faith-based initiative. And he said that if you look around the world, it's quite obvious that the main source of division and terrorism and conflict and war is religion. Why are the Shia fighting the Sunni in Iraq? They're fighting over religion. What about the Israelis and the Palestinians? They're fighting over religion. Well, how about in Northern Ireland, the Catholics and the Protestants? They're fighting over religion. And if you take a little backward glance at history, it's the same sad story. The Crusades, the Inquisition, the religious wars, the Salem witch trials. The writer says, hey, any rational person is bound to conclude that belief in God is a menace to human civilization. If we could get rid of God and have a secular society, this would not only be a more scientific and a more rational, but it would also be a more decent and a more peaceful society. I give you this example to show the way in which the new atheism very craftily surfs on the wave of current events, drawing for it a measure of media attention that atheism hasn't gotten in the past. The new atheists are also pretty good about approaching young Christians and stumping them with questions that, however often you go to church, you often are not very well prepared to answer. So the new atheist is likely to come up at a school or college, say, hey, Mr. Christian or Miss Christian, you call yourself a Christian, but have you conducted an independent comparison or investigation of all the religions of the world? Have you tried to determine which one is true and which ones are false? No. You're basically a Christian because your parents are Christian. You're a Christian because you were born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Chicago, Illinois. If you had been born in Afghanistan, you would be most likely a Muslim. Or if you had been born in Tibet, chances are you'd be a Buddhist. Your Christianity is not a function of any kind of thought or conviction. It's merely the accident of birth. So how do you know that your religion is true and everybody else's is false? How do you know you've got the right answer? How do you know that at the end of the day, when the world comes to an end and the final curtain falls and the last phone call comes in, how do you know it isn't coming from Salt Lake City? Big surprise.